Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Biden's declared a major federal disaster in Kentucky as communities across 8 states reel from deadly tornadoes that ripped across a swath of the southern and midwestern U.S. Friday and Saturday. Around 100 people are feared dead, with the highest death toll in Kentucky, where at least 80 people were killed. This is Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear.
It's like nothing any of us have ever seen before, even in a movie or on TV. It is that devastating. I mean, homes totally gone, and the people inside them totally gone too. This is something so devastating. The warnings were there. I don't fault anybody for that. One of our challenges is we're losing so many people in this. Most of our morgues aren't big enough. So our coroners from all over the state are coming in to help.
Deaths were also confirmed in Arkansas, Illinois, Missouri, and Tennessee. In Edwardsville, Illinois, an Amazon warehouse partially collapsed Friday night, killing at least 6 people. Labor and rights advocates blasted Amazon following the news. Union leader Stuart Applebaum said, quote, "Requiring workers to work through such a major tornado warning event as this was inexcusable," he said. We'll have more on the devastating tornadoes after headlines with climate scientist Michael Mann. As reported, U.S. COVID-19 deaths approach 800,000. Health officials are urging fully vaccinated people to get their booster shots while the Delta winter surge continues and more Omicron cases are identified. This is Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Preliminary data show that when you get a booster, for example, a 3rd shot of an mRNA, it raises the level of protection high enough that it then does do well against the Omicron.
Nearly 2 years into the pandemic, 1 in 100 U.S. residents over the age of 65 have died from COVID-19, according to official records. Here in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul's ordered businesses to resume enforcing an indoor face mask requirement starting today, unless they've implemented a vaccine requirement. COVID hospitalizations in New York are up 86% over the last month. In Michigan, Republican election official William Hartman has died from COVID-19. Hartman was one of 2 Michigan Republicans who at first refused to certify Joe Biden's 2020 win against Donald Trump in Wayne County. He was also staunchly opposed to COVID vaccinations. In international news, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has tested positive for COVID-19. He's receiving treatment and has shown mild symptoms. He reported feeling unwell after leaving a memorial service in former President F.W. de Klerk in Cape Town Sunday. Ramaphosa's office said in a statement, quote, "Vaccination remains the best protection against severe illness and hospitalization." The World Bank and World Health Organization said more than 500 million people around the world were pushed into extreme poverty last year due to health care costs. The pandemic disrupted health services and triggered the worst economic crisis since the 30s. The WHO called on all governments to work towards a universal health care system. The Supreme Court ruled Friday abortion providers in Texas can challenge the state's near-total ban on abortions, but the law, they say, will remain in effect while legal challenges play out. The court also limited lawsuits to just certain state licensing officials. Chief Justice John Roberts said Texas's ban undermined previous Supreme Court rulings, including Roe v. Wade. Justice Roberts wrote, quote, "The clear purpose and actual effect of SB 8 has been to nullify those courts' rulings," adding, quote, "It's the role of the Supreme Court in our constitutional system that is at stake," he said. Mark Heron from the Center for Reproductive Rights, who argued on behalf of abortion providers before the Supreme Court, spoke after Friday's ruling.
What we need is relief at the federal level. We need Congress to pass the Women's Health Protection Act, which would stop these unconstitutional bans.
Separately, Supreme Court justices Friday dismissed a challenge to the Texas abortion law brought by the Justice Department. Meanwhile, in California, Governor Gavin Newsom said he would model a law around the purchase of firearms on the Texas abortion ban. Newsom tweeted, quote, "The Supreme Court's letting private citizens in Texas sue to stop abortion. If that's the precedent, then we'll let Californians sue those who put ghost guns and assault weapons on our streets. If Texas can ban abortion and endanger lives, California can ban deadly weapons of war and save lives," Governor Newsom tweeted. A top-secret U.S. military unit sidestepped safeguards and repeatedly ordered airstrikes that killed civilians as it worked to identify targets in the U.S. bombing campaign against the Islamic State in Syria. The New York Times reports the unit of Army Delta Force commandos known as Talon Anvil worked in 3 shifts around the clock between 2014 and 19 to select buildings, vehicles, and crowds of people to attack. Those struck included civilians who had no role in the conflict, farmers harvesting their fields, children playing in the street, families fleeing fighting, and people sheltering in buildings. The Times reports the civilian killings alarmed Talon Anvil's partners in the military and the CIA, who complained to superiors up the chain of command, but their protests were ignored. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met today with Emirati Crown Prince and de facto leader Mohammed bin Zayed at his private palace in Abu Dhabi. It's the first ever official visit by an Israeli Prime Minister to the United Arab Emirates and comes after the 2 countries agreed last year to normalize relations. In Ethiopia, Tigrayan forces have recaptured the UNESCO World Heritage town of Lalibela from government fighters, according to witnesses on the ground. This comes less than 2 weeks after the government said it took control of the historic site. On Saturday, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said he had returned to the front lines of battle. Meanwhile, a new Human Rights Watch report found Tigrayan rebels carried out dozens of civilian executions in August and September. The UN has said all parties to the conflict had committed violations of international human rights, some of which could amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The more than year-long conflict has killed thousands of civilians, displaced millions, and created a humanitarian disaster. In Argentina, thousands of protesters filled the streets of Buenos Aires on Saturday, rejecting a possible pact between their government and the International Monetary Fund. Protesters say any deal to have Argentina repay $45 billion in loans to the IMF would require austerity measures that would hurt working people.
We are about to walk into the Plaza de Mayo to demand the debt not be paid, despite adjustments and people suffering. We must break with the IMF, refuse to pay the debt, and allocate those thousands and millions of dollars to solve the social and economic problems that exist in our country.
Voters in the South Pacific archipelago of New Caledonia have overwhelmingly rejected independence from France, but Sunday's referendum, the 3rd such vote over the past 3 years, was boycotted by pro-independence groups who pushed to postpone the referendum, and it's unclear whether they'll accept the results. Turnout was just over 40%. Caledonia's new current president, Louis Mapou, is pro-independence and said the territory would continue to pursue the path of emancipation. The island territory was colonized by France in 1853. A World Bank-administered trust fund says it will transfer $280 million to the World Food Program and UNICEF in Afghanistan in an effort to ease a looming humanitarian catastrophe. The funds for food security and health care are a fraction of what Afghanistan lost after the Taliban seized power in August and the United States and other donors cut off financial aid. The United Nations warns nearly 23 million people in Afghanistan, more than half the population, face potentially life-threatening food shortages this winter, with nearly 9 million already on the brink of famine. The Biden administration's levied new sanctions against dozens of people and entities tied to China, Bangladesh, Burma, and North Korea. The Treasury Department announced the sanctions Friday, International Human Rights Day, in protest of Burma's treatment of Rohingya Muslims and China's treatment of Muslims from the Uyghur minority group, among other abuses. The United Nations and human rights groups estimate over 1 million Uyghur Muslims have been interned in camps in China's far west Xinjiang region, treatment the Biden administration has called genocide. China's foreign ministry rejected the U.S. sanctions and promised to strike back against what it called reckless U.S. actions. In Minnesota, the manslaughter trial of former police officer Kim Potter continues. Last week, jurors heard testimony from Daunte Wright's partner, Elena Albrecht Payton, who was in the car at the time of his killing. She described the harrowing moments after Kim Potter shot Wright.
I just remember trying to just get him up. I was the only one who had everybody there. I was trying to help him. And I was trying to push on his chest and call his name. And he wasn't answering me. He was just gasping.
Prosecutors also showed the court body cam footage of police handcuffing the distraught Elena Albrecht-Payton after the shooting. Witnesses say police officers did not offer immediate medical assistance to Wright after he was shot and waited 4 minutes to help him. Voters in Orleans Parish, Louisiana, have elected a new sheriff. First-time candidate Susan Hudson beat 17-year incumbent Marlon Gusman in a runoff election Saturday to become the first Black woman ever elected sheriff in Louisiana. Hudson's a former prosecutor. She spent a decade as New Orleans independent police monitor, a position established in a 2008 voter referendum aimed at rooting out corruption, racism, and brutality in the New Orleans Police Department. A Homeland Security watchdog found a special unit within Customs and Border Protection used government databases designed for tracking terror threats to investigate journalists. The report by the DHS Inspector General triggered a backlash from media organizations which are demanding an explanation for the practice, which a quoted CBP agent in the report called status quo. And in Seattle, Socialist City Council member Kshama Sawant appears to have narrowly defeated a recall effort pushed by corporate interests. The election has not been officially called yet, as a few hundred votes are still being challenged. Voter turnout was 53%, 10% higher than last month's general election. Kshama Sawant has been elected by Seattle voters 3 times. She helped Seattle become the first major city to adopt a $15 an hour minimum wage and successfully pass the Amazon tax to build affordable housing in one of the country's most expensive cities. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.